Morning everyone and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be looking at Honda's NC750. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction around the models and the various years they came out, a walk around the bike just to introduce you to some of the features, and then some buying tips, what's good, what's not so good, and then some frequently asked questions, the sort of things that everyone always asks about a new bike or something they're considering, and see if that's going to be the bike for you. If you like what you see, click the old like button. And if you want to subscribe, that'd be a great help too. Let's get started. Okay, so Honda's NC750X comes from a long line of kind of bulletproof workman-like twins from Honda, the CX500, the CX650, and latterly the NTV650 some years ago. It launched in 2012 as the NC700, both the S and the X. The S is the road-going or roadster type model, and the X is the kind of adventure model. And then the A variants had anti-lock braking added, which was in some markets but not in others. There's also a D variant which added a second gen DCT, the robotised manual gearbox, and more of that later. Powers 50 horsepower out of the 700cc motor and 61 newton meters or 45 foot-pounds of torque at 4,750. In 2014, Honda introduced the 750 version into European, Canadian and Australian markets, which they achieved by increasing the bore to 77mm, which saw the power rise to 54 horsepower at 6250 and torque to 68 newton meters or 50 foot-pounds of torque at 4,750 revs. 2016 sees the 750 get a facelift with a more modern front end, complete with LED lights and a more coherently styled rear end that looks a little bit less like a baboon's backside. The exhaust changes from the classy stainless item on the original version to a frankly slightly cheaper looking can that's EU4 compliant, yet sounds a little bit more fruity than the original. The front gets a little bigger and the forks are improved. The dash changes to a reverse LCD panel, more trendy perhaps, but harder to read at times. And the DCT options change from a simple drive or sport mode to drive and sport 1, 2 or 3. A difference being simply how many revs the bike holds onto before changing up a gear. 2018 sees traction control added for most markets, and finally the 750 arrives in the USA. Quite why Honda didn't introduce it there 2 years earlier remains a bit of a mystery. 2021 sees a new model which attempts to combine the traditional styled Road S model with the adventure styled X model. In reality it's an X model but lowered at both ends, and the S model has now completely disappeared. Weight varies across the years, but it's broadly around 215 kilos wet or so for the manual, with the DCT coming in around 10 kilograms heavier. Both models top out at around 115 miles per hour. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the model history. Let's take a quick look around the bike front to back. So this is a European spec 2018 bike. At the front we have a 17-inch wheel wearing a 120/70 tyre and a single disc, obviously, with the improved forks that came in this year. The engine is the 745cc parallel twin with a 270-degree crank. This gives it slightly more character and feel, and I've read that Honda deliberately used a simpler balance system in this engine to retain a little more character. And it works. On the road you feel the engine working, yet the vibration is never bothersome, and you feel it pulsing if you will, but it's not unpleasant. At the rear we've got another 17-inch wheel, but this time with a 160/60 tyre. Like the front, the suspension isn't the greatest, and more expensive shocks, obviously like YSS, let alone Öhlins, will give you an improvement. But let's not forget this is pitched mainly as a commuter bike, and it's built to a modest budget, and in that role it works absolutely fine. Working our way back up to the rear, you've got the 14-litre tank that hides under the passenger seat. That will do about 250 miles if you're touring, maybe 200 if you're commuting. Obviously the main seat, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, it's not the most comfortable in the world. And then obviously the frunk or this storage area where the tank would normally be, which is a bit of a party piece for the NC, and it'll take an amazing amount of kit, and you'll very quickly wonder how you ever did without one. The instrument panel is a reverse LCD, and I have to say I'm not a huge fan. The early LCD panels are seen as a bit old-fashioned now, but ultimately they're easier to read. These are great, ironically, with the sun directly on them, but with the light coming from the side and some of the small fonts used by Honda, it can be hard to read. If I turn it on, you'll probably see exactly what I'm referring to. Finally, the fairing itself. I'm 6'2" and I find it okay, although I get wind directly in my face. It's quite a smooth airflow and I don't find it that tiring. Others find it a real bugbear, however, and change it out, and there are a number of different aftermarket options out there from the usual firms like Givy. Okay, so that's a brief overview of some of the features of the bikes, the sort of standout features. So let's look at what's good and what's not so good about the bike. Okay, so what are the pros and cons of the bike? Well, firstly, good signs. The bottom end power and mid-range power is really good, and it makes for a great relaxing commuter with plenty of power where you need it most, without masses of clutch slip or loads of revs needed to get off the line. It's very easy to ride. Value, they aren't that expensive new, and because they've been around now for over 10 years, there should be one out there for pretty much every budget. Economy on them is legendary. It's 75 to 95 miles to the gallon. That's imperial. I'm guessing around 60 to 80 miles per gallon if you're in the US, and if you're a European guy, then somewhere between 3.8 litres and 3 litres per 100 kilometre, something in that range. Reliability, obviously the basic design is extremely robust and long lasting, and while there are a few niggles which I'll cover shortly, there's little to stop these racking up huge mileages, and certainly over 200,000 miles is not unheard of. Handling is generally good for what it's designed for. The front can still feel a little harsh even with the improved forks, and the rear shock does betray the budget nature of the bike, but it's a balanced package. And talking of balance, it's easy to forget this is not a particularly light bike. Much of the time, as the weight is carried quite low, it's fine, but there have been times where I've found a sudden stop or a change of direction at very low speed. It does give you a feeling that there's a fair bit of mass well hidden away down here. And what's perhaps not quite so good? Well, top end power, 54 horsepower for a 750 is not a lot in a bike weighing 214 kilos or around 225 kilos for the DCT. That notwithstanding, it rarely feels slow up until the legal limit, and it's only when you go for that quick overtake or roll on at motorway speeds that you realise there's not a lot more power there, and certainly no more than its smaller brother, the CB500. For the daily commute though, and a fortnight touring around Europe once a year perhaps, it's not a problem. Seat comfort, however, is a problem for many of us, and it's probably the most complained about aspect of the bike. The issue is twofold. It's far too hard and unforgiving, and it slopes forward. So when you inevitably start trying to shuffle around on the seat after an hour or so, the slope of the seat forces you forward into the same position you were just trying to escape from. There are a number of solutions that work to varying degrees, additional pads like the one I had on the bike. They're cheap enough and help a little bit, and you can't, but you can also get the seat remodeled. Or you can go the whole hog and buy an aftermarket seat from the likes of Sargent. Shad did do a replacement seat, but that's sadly discontinued now. The slope on the seat can also be addressed by making a new bracket which raises the front slightly, and there's a great video out there on this, so rather than reinvent the wheel and cover that here, I'll add a link in the description below to that video. It's very good. Finally, the front brake. Let's be clear, there's not a lack of ultimate stopping power here. Grab the front lever hard and it will stop you quickly enough, but you do have to haul on it more than most bikes, and this can give you a feeling that there's a lack of front brake, or it's slightly at odds with everything else that's so effortless on the bike. I have to say it's the first big bike where I've found I've almost always using a bit of back brake to bring the bike to a stop quickly. Different pads and lines will help here, I think, but perhaps a change of master cylinder might be worth experimenting with if you wanted a lighter pull for the same amount of stopping power. And so let's have a look at servicing. Well, oil and filter is 8,000 miles or 12,500 kilometres. Well, filter is actually showing as 16k on the service sheet, but it seems daft to me to not change that with the oil at 8,000 miles. For those bikes with the DCT transmission, there's an additional filter for that. Again, I'd change that with the oil at 8,000 miles. Valve adjustments are every 16,000. Plugs are an inspect at 16,000 and replace at 32,000 or 50,000 kilometers. The rear suspension linkage is often not well greased, so I'd advise stripping that, probably at the first service, and more of that shortly. Engine oil is checked by idling the engine briefly if cold, and then screwing in the dipstick, and chain tension should be between 30 and 40 mil. Okay, so that's a little bit of brief detail about the servicing requirements. So perhaps some things to look out for and some frequently asked questions about the bike. As I mentioned earlier, these are generally one of the toughest bikes out there, but there are a few things to be aware of. Thankfully, nothing too serious. Okay, so if I just go around the other side. So as you can see on this one, there's no gear lever. On the very early NC700s with the DCT transmission, there is a shift pin that is slightly too small a diameter. As a result, it can shear. Now, given these are at least 10 years old now, it's either likely that's already happened and been replaced with a better one, or it's not going to cause you any problem. If it does go, it's not a major problem and certainly doesn't need the case is splitting or anything of that nature. The 750 engine is unaffected by this problem. Wheel bearings can fail early, particularly the rear, sometimes with as little as 20,000 miles on the clock. There's various theories, from the usual lack of lube from the factory to incorrectly sized spacers in certain model years, and obviously the use of jet washers should be avoided. Most worryingly are the cases where the bearing itself has moved within the wheel, which has caused the wheel to wear, and in extreme cases requiring the wheel to be replaced. I would check this carefully at each rear tyre change and consider using a bearing retaining compound to stop any movement of the bearing within the wheel if you're in any doubt. As I mentioned just now, the rear suspension linkage is often not well greased, and it's wise precaution to strip this and grease it thoroughly at the first 8,000 mile service. If you don't, and especially if the bike is used in all weathers, it can seize and be a major challenge to free off to clean, replace and re-grease it all, so well worth doing. Now the battery sits within the front. I've got a panel removed so you can see where it sits, and a number of issues get reported from non-starting to DCT errors and are often can be traced back to the battery. Now, not only does it seem unusually prone to just loose battery connections, so always check that they're tight first, but the battery does seem to be a little bit underspecified and can fail early. The DCT system is generally very reliable, so if you have any issues first, check the battery connections are tight and the battery is in good health. If those all check out okay, perform a DCT reset, and I'll put that on the screen in a minute. Ensure the engine is warm when you do it. Beyond that, the actuator motor can suffer occasionally from worn or dirty brushes, but cleaning them up is straightforward, and don't always assume a new motor is required because they're about 300 quid. The dual clutches are very reliable, as is the electro-hydraulic actuating system. Just make sure when you do the oil change you don't forget to do this oil filter under the little cover just here. There is another one hiding under there. Another question is regards to the DCT mode is which is best, and simply put, whichever works best for you. The early versions offered only drive or sport, and latterly we got drive, sport 1, sport 2 and sport 3. Drive does make the bike change up very early, so okay on the open road if you're not in a hurry, but S1 sees the engine labour less, and if you're really enthusiastic, S2 or even S3 may work better for you. Tyres are another common topic with all bikes and forums, and Michelin are invariably most often recommended, especially if the highest priority is mileage, but there are many other well-regarded options from Metzeler, Avon and Bridgestone to name a few. And the OEM tyres prior to 21 were notoriously bad with a very short life. These, especially commissioned by Honda, aren't necessarily representative of the normal tyres that Bridgestone produce. Which oil is always another favourite question, isn't it? The short answer is that Honda recommend a 10W30 oil, and the NC is not demanding of its oil, and as long as it's good quality semi-synthetic that meets the standard spec, any more fancy oils like a fully synthetic, you're just wasting your money. Some do use a 10W40 in very hot climates with no ill effects, I know, but I've not seen this specified by Honda, certainly not in Europe. And if you have, please let me know in the comments below. As I touched on in the service section, when you're checking the oil level, you dip, you unscrew this, take it out, wipe it, put it back in to check the oil level, but you do not screw it in. You just dip it and then check the level. I have heard of another issue that, while not common, is being seen by Honda techs across the model years, and that's broken cam chain tensions, which is a bit of a worry, where the tip actually shears off. The symptoms are a sudden increase in cam chain noise. If you hear this, get it checked quickly, as the repair seems reasonably straightforward, assuming the broken off part causes no further issues. Again, if you've had this or had further info, please let me know in the comments below. Finally, if you've had an NC for any length of time, you'll inevitably hear the comment about it's half a car engine. And this gets argued back and forth ad infinitum. Without going into great detail, while it's clearly not half a jazz engine, some of the architecture, the bore and the stroke on the original, for example, and the cylinder head and valve gear do look remarkably like the car engine on which it's supposed to be based. And this at least partly explains the usual car, or the unusual engine characteristics for a bike engine anyway, and the very low red line. Okay guys, so a bit of a quick download there, lots of information, some of it I hope is useful to you. I think before considering one of these, you really need to have a think about what it is you're after. If you're after a steady workhorse that's reliable, tough, crazy economical and easygoing all-rounder, then these are very, very hard to beat. If, however, you want something that's a bit less sensible, something that's a bit more fun, perky, and certainly a bit more powerful, then probably something like an MT-07 or even Honda's new Hornet, which is pretty much double the power of one of these, may be more your bag. So it's a great bike if it fits what you want it to do, and that's the sort of the worthy workhorse everyday commuter with a bit of touring in the summer maybe. For that, it's very, very good, but consider getting a better seat. So thanks for watching. If you liked it, please tick the like. If you've got some feedback, any feedback, good or bad, please put it in the description, in the comments below. I'll read them all, so thank you very much for taking the time. And if you'd like to see more of it, as I say, tick the like button and please consider subscribing. Thank you very much. See you on the next one.